Final question. So listeners might have just finished listening to the podcast interview with us, the official interview, and sort of walked away. You made a pretty strong call to be like, essentially stop taking ayahuasca. It's spiritual extractivism. And it's not you saying that, but you echoing the voices of the indigenous people who are saying, stop. You're doing more harm than good. And so let's say everyone listening, as a consequence of listening to that interview, choose to forego ayahuasca shamanism, and forego their efforts to get spiritual meaning from traditions that aren't their own, be it ayahuasca, Taoism, yoga, native spirituality, that we stop trying to extract spirituality from elsewhere, and then what do we do? Because the reality is, like, us here in the northern Western world, like the children of colonialism, like the long bastard children of a homeless god, we don't really have anything. So, like, what do we do then? Like, what do we do to solve this issue of deep meaninglessness in our lives if we don't reach to other cultures that still have a sense of what it meant to live a spiritually and philosophically meaningful life?
So it's one thing to learn from a culture, and it's another thing to take. And I think that the reality that goes underneath all this, and kind of at the center of all of it, is that idea about consumerism, and this idea that we're not really breaking anything if we're just looking for another way to kind of buy our way out of the problem that we've found ourselves in, which is we live in a reality that is absolutely deprived of meaning. And we're supposed to have it the best. And I talk about this in the book a bit, but I just really can't make enough of a point. The number one killer during the time in which all this happened, the number one cause of death in the United States shifted from heart disease to overdose, and they've at this point I think it's the U.S. Health Department. I forget exactly which organization it is, but it's one of the main health departments, is saying that accidental death and overdose and suicide are no longer distinguishable. And they're talking about putting all those things in one category. Basically, that you there?
Yeah. I'm just saying, whoa, that's intense. I heard about that, and I hadn't fully contextualized it. So yeah, please continue.
So, I mean, it's just like a state of the reality that we realize we live lives that are so deprived of meaning, and there's billion-dollar industries created all around to try and capitalize on that we don't see that we're reaching out in every single way, and that every single thing that we know about the way we interact with the world and the things that we believe are supposed to be good they're not doing it. They're not cutting it. And so trying to find ways to kind of mix and match all that by digging in other people's cultures and, like, celebrating things that they have fought for without any context is just to kind of continue that process. So there's, in terms of the response to that, I could say unequivocally the wrong things to do are, one is to try and, create this kind of Disney characterization of other cultures and reduce them to a song and dance or substance or whatever, and then, uphold them as that. I mean, these cultures, every culture is complex except ours. We just have complex issues. But the other thing is that I see a lot of people doing, and this is continually becoming kind of a bigger thing, especially as a lot of issues about colonialism and a lot of issues about patriarchy and sexism and racism are taking a hold and getting more attention in the media, particularly on social media, is you see this white reactionism where people are like, well, I'm going to uphold my culture. And it's okay to say that your culture sucks because your culture sucks.
Yeah.
Like, that's just, that's the reality of it. Like, even with me, I think about this stuff, and I don't have this drive to be like, where did I come from? Like, where did this come from? I mean, I was adopted. I never met my birth parents. I have no interest in it. And, like, but even when I look at it, I see where I'm from. I don't make sense. I'm barely even from Europe. Like, parts of Eastern Europe and parts of Western Europe, and it just from all over the place in the Middle East and things. Like, who we have become and who modernity and a globalized civilization has made us. And I'm talking to people like myself, which is effectively decultured white people or people who are considered white. I mean, like great grandparents, when they're born, they weren't considered white. It was because of World War II and Hitler that we were now considered white. But we the idea of searching back and trying to find some meaning in our culture has led to this mass exodus, in part with alt-right, and in part just because of just doubling down on the whole identity politics thing, is that people have reinvigorated white supremacist culture, and finding all these supposed like native Viking, Norwegian conqueror kind of methods of saying, well, this is my culture. This is what I'm going to be. Don't do that. Don't be that guy. Again, the culture sucks. Like it created this situation, and like we just got to get over the ideas that we have some allegiance to our past as individuals, and not understanding that at this point, most of us are so far removed from a logic or a culture that could function, or could work, that we don't just see the obvious thing is that we need to be talking about creating cultures and creating community in a very radical sense, and rewilding, and also asking questions and understanding and trying to understand other people's perspectives and understand the nature of what it would be like and what it is to have survived genocide or to have survived ethnocide, not just in the sense of like, as somebody who grew up Jewish, like having this cultural understanding of like we're survivors of genocide and we're going to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen again, but to understand from a native perspective where we're still saying the genocide didn't happen, even though 75 to 90% of all populations died off, and then the continued processes by which those practices, the ethnocidal practices, carried on practices of genocide, have created situations where, what has worked or what is working for the native identity that's come about as a response to the industrial schools and the forced mission processes and things like the 60s swoop, where people were literally stolen from their families. And you get this kind of like globalized response for, powwows and sundances and things like that unify a lot of people under this native identity. Like, that's their healing mechanism. That's their coping mechanism. And again, with ayahuasca, that has become a part of the coping mechanism for a lot of Amazonian peoples. Like, it doesn't mean that it's just a free for all for anybody else. But I think that the thing that we have to be doing, the thing that we have an obligation to do, is the one thing that we've been trained from the start to not acknowledge. And that is the consequences of our way of being. And you gotta kill the ego. Like, cause it does get hard. And that's the reality of this world. It's hard to accept our role within a colonizing civilization. It's hard to accept, and I'm not even necessarily saying people should accept it, but you have to accept that this is the reality. And you have to accept that, it's not just about like loathing yourself or something like that. You have to be proactive about it. Like, it doesn't have to be this whole process of just continually kind of tearing down, do I have a right to exist or something like that? It's like, well, you do exist. So whatever, get over it. Like, but you can change things about your life, and you can change things about the way that you interact with the world. And I think that the one thing, and that's something that is at the core of my work, is that idea that we were all born nomadic hunter-gatherers. For me, and for virtually everybody I interact with that doesn't come from a relatively intact culture, that's the closest thing to home for any of us. That's the one thing that that supersedes everything else. And that is entirely within our reach. That's still within us. We're just conditioned to not deal with it. And the reality is that this world is still fighting. For everything we have thrown at this world, it is shocking that it's still here. And we are shifting it. We are causing serious, irreparable damage to it. But there's still birds singing. There's still trees growing. There's still communities of trees. There's still mycelium that grows up and helps them communicate with each other. Like, this world is alive. And so I think that to understand the place that we have within it, we have to do everything to understand how we get to this point and retrain ourselves to see all the things that are hidden in plain sight, but to also see that the way that the world functions in ecological terms and in social terms is fucking amazing. And, really, it comes down, for me, to understanding that, to get it to the point where it's like this isn't just an idea. Like how I see the world, how I see civilization, how I approach things as an anarchist. It's not just a matter of uh, what do I get out of this or something like that, but just becoming the embodiment of the world that you know exists and doing everything you can to fight for it, and doing the exact opposite of what we've been trained to do, which is like when things get complicated, try and intellectualize your way out of it and justify. But just as painful as all these things can be, and as hard as they can be to confront, it becomes our obligation as the supposed benefactors of civilization, of colonization, that we need to be held accountable for what it takes to create that reality and recreate it on a daily basis, and the roles we play within it, and to do everything we can to continually draw out what is happening and what it takes to get there, and then fighting it every single place that you possibly can, because none of this stuff is done and over. And that's one of the biggest takeaways for all this stuff, is that if you want to have meaning in your life, then find something real and fight for it. And that's not to oversimplify it. It's not to say that if you're the descendant of white Europeans that you don't have historical trauma yourself and you're not dealing with all this stuff, or the PTSD or something like that doesn't apply. None of that's true. We're all damaged in a billion ways. There's 9 billion people. There are going to be 9 billion people on this planet, and there's 9 billion ways that people can be destroyed by the domestication process. But it's by understanding how those things are connected, instead of just focusing on everything on an individual level, that we'll be able to see the bigger picture and see how those things interact, and hopefully help us to be able to communicate and relate to the world and other people on a wholly more meaningful level. And it's not easy. There's no shortcut, is the unfortunate other side. But if somebody tries to sell you a solution, they're lying.